Hey guys, welcome back to Wraith's History Lesson. Today we're looking at the Tier 9 Russian tank, the T54. And a little bit of history, there's actually two very similar tanks. They're kind of not a lot of difference, and that's the T54/T55. There's some very subtle differences between the two. Most of them is armor packages and electronics, but there was enough of a difference they named them. But a lot of these were interchangeable for a very long time. So the T54 first started prototypes in March of 1945, entered full production in 1947, became the main battle tank of the Soviet Army and the Warsaw Pact countries during the Cold War, and became one of the most produced military vehicles in history. Production numbers anywhere from 86 to 100,000 units were produced. During the Cold War, the Soviet tanks never directly faced their NATO adversaries in the 50s, which would have been the Centurions and the M48s. M60s weren't quite around yet. But this thing had the Allies so afraid that it rushed production with the Royal Ordnance L7, which is a 105mm rifled gun, which was used by actually a number of countries. You see it on the Leopard. You see it on the American medium tanks at Tier 9 and 10. You see it on the Centurion. And you also see it on the FV-4202. And you'll see it in the top Tier 9 and Tier 10 Japanese tanks as well. So the appearance of this machine scared the bejesus out of the Allies and NATO countries during the Cold War. So a little bit about the history of these tanks is that they were mechanically simple and robust, very durable, easy to work on, easy to operate designs, and that's true of all the Russian equipment. So you didn't need a whole lot of training to actually operate one of these. The tank was a small, compact tank, which made it hard to hit, had good mobility, and I've stood next to these. I've stood next to a T54-55 that was captured from a museum and was captured during the Iraq War. The U.S. was involved in, and it's not very big at all. The M48 and the M60 I stood next to are huge compared to this tiny little T55. So the game representation is actually pretty accurate to that. They're nimble, they're quick, they're lightweight. So looking at the 100mm gun this thing uses historically was the 100mm DT10 gun. And at the time was a lot more powerful than the 20-pounders the British were using, and also the 90mm the Americans were using. And this advantage lasted until the development of the M60-man battle tank for the Allies, and they went ahead and upgraded the Centurions and M48s with that 105mm rifle gun the British developed, which the Americans called the M68 and the Brits called the L7. Now the T55-54s were forced to use heat rounds to engage long-range targets, and this remained true until the 1960s. And it's not very accurate at very long ranges, but the Soviets figured for fighting in Europe, it's good enough for us, and they considered that acceptable. So it wasn't until later in the 1960s or 70s they actually pushed for development, actually got some sub-munitions developed, some sabot rounds, some different chemical composition warheads. Now, it had its drawbacks. Now, because its small size was pretty cramped on the inside for the crew, so they kind of suffered that. And it kind of helped slows operation of equipment and controls. And the Soviet armies actually had height requirements. You could not be over a certain height to ride this ride, ladies and gentlemen. Never heard it go out that way for ride requirements. And did not have any kind of MBC equipment, which is nuclear, biological, chemical equipment for the crew. So they ended up having to fight with these things. They had to make do or wear gas mask and mop gear inside. But all these were largely corrected in the T55, and that's why it was enough of a difference that's why the T54 became the T55. Now, some other disadvantage to that was that these were so small, is that, with the turret being so small, is the gun could only get down so low. So the gun depression historically was not very good. It was a whole 5 degrees for these tanks. And occasionally secondary explosions would set off because of the ammo, just the way this thing was covered. Now historically this thing did see combat, the T-54 did, in Vietnam. against American-built, South Vietnamese-controlled M48s. And all those were 90mm M48s. And this was shortly after the U.S. had left or was in the process of leaving. So the first engagement we've already kind of talked about, where the Operation Lambson in 719 in February 1971, where the T54s got their butts kicked by M41 Walker Bulldogs. Remember I talked about that in Operation last video about the history with the M41 Walkers. So now they get payback though. They get payback on those little pesky M41s. So in Easter in 1972, South Vietnamese 20th Tank Regiment, consisting of 57 M48A3s, reports of a large NVA tank column, North Vietnamese Army tank column, moving south toward Dong Ha. About noon, they spotted them. They get set up in an overwatch position on a roadway and begin to shoot down on top of them from about 2,500 to 3,000 meters away, which is pretty good distance for tanks at that time. And the 90mm Pattons quickly opened fire, and they destroyed 9 of the PT-76 light tanks and 2 medium 54 tanks. But it was enough, and the hail of fire, volume of fire was enough to drive them away. So they did overrun a large group of M41 Walker Bulldogs, which we talked about, and another time they engaged the 20th Tank Regiment of the South Vietnam. The Pattons opened fire at 2,000 meters. The M48s kind of panicked, kind of pushed down on them. T54s panicked, began to break up, and by the end of the day, they lost 16 T54s and a Type 59, and not a single M48 was lost. So historically, there's the historical side of the aspect of this. Look at the game: 3,200 damage, 1,300 assisted, 3 kills, 4,800 base XP. It's a very good game, guys. Now we'll go see what the historical side and how it translated over to the wargaming side. Alright guys, now we're on to wargaming, what they've done with the Type 50, the T54 Russian Tier 9 medium tank. So we'll quickly run down some stats. Got a 7 horsepower engine, 56 kilometers an hour, 48 degrees traverse speed, and 44 degrees turret speed, 390 meter view range. Hull armor is 120 in the front, 80 on the sides, and 45 in the rear. So it's very good armored, very good sloped on the front end. Turrets 200 on the front, 160 on the side, and 65 on the rear. And don't be fooled, this turret does have a very bouncy turret. It's rounded, got lots of good angles on it. There's the commander's hatches on tops are very small, very hard to hit. So you need a big gun to go through this. This tank, when it gets hulled down, can hold its own against just about anybody, except for obviously the Tier 10 tank destroyers and maybe a few other bigger Tier 10 heavy tanks. So this gun does get this tank does get 2 final choices for guns. You get the historically pretty correct 100mm D10T2C gun, which gives you 201 millimeters of penetration, 320 damage, and a rate of fire of 7.69 rounds a minute. Or the 100mm D54 gun, which gives you 219 pen, 320 damage, rate of fire of 7.32 rounds a minute. And you might ask, what is the difference between those two guns? It quickly comes down to the D54 gets better penetration, and 18mm penetration is significant in this game, but it loses a little bit on the accuracy, and it loses a little bit on the rate of fire. So most people who play the T54 will actually use the historically correct gun, the DT10 gun, and that's what I have in this game. And you see I put it to pretty good use here early on. So this tank in wargaming is considered by many to be the gold standard of medium tanks, especially high-tier medium tanks. And following the tech tree, off of this tank you can unlock the T62, which was another historically correct tank, or the Object 140, which was a paper tank prototype. Well, not really paper, it's a prototype tank. And you can tell with the Russians, because if it's a T, as in T54, T10, T62, those are the production variants. When you see objects for any of the Russian tanks, those are either prototypes or paper tanks. So this was a production tank, this was a real life tank, and I've been up close to this tank, and this tank is a lot smaller than an M60. the A3s. I've been up next to both of these tanks, and if I have a picture later on, I'll dig it out and I'll throw it on my Facebook page of me standing next to it. And you'll see it's a pretty small tank, and the game does do it justice. It's not a very big tank in the game either. And what are they doing? Oh, think of the children, guys. This is a family channel. Good Lord, 2M1, that's the new thing about the new map. There's all kinds of drop points, and they get taken advantage of and abused horribly for their failures at life. Oh, regretting life choices. I kind of got distracted for a second there. Alrighty. That's a horrible display of debauchery by a pair of M103s. So anyway, other tanks that share this platform is the T54 Lightweight, which obviously is a stripped-down armor version of this, and it's got a kind of a lesser gun. That gun is also available as part of the T54 line, but it's not the final gun. Also, the Motherland, believe it or not, is technically the T54 prototype, which we don't have in the console version, but they do have in the PC version, that T54 prototype. And that's what the Motherland is. And it's, I don't have the exact stats for the PC version, but it's not a whole lot different than what the PC version has. So we got it as a premium tank, so enjoy it. So if you ever wonder why that tank's not in there, it's there. It's just disguised as a Motherland and a pretty camo. So I do like the 100mm gun on this, the D10 gun. I know it's lesser penetration, but if I want more penetration, I'll throw heat rounds and get significantly more pen. And you can see the accuracy for this. This is 350. This is medium long range kind of accuracy, and I'm getting some hits in pretty consistently on this WZ-11111114. So overall, it's definitely one of my favorite tanks to play. It's one of the first tier 9 medium tanks I got. I've kept it. I've enjoyed it. And we're hunting down this last Goomba here. So the T54 is definitely, if you like brawling, fairly fast armor in your face, this thing can get up and knife fight and turn and bump heads, and you can face hug other medium tanks and they won't be able to pen your turret. Now obviously if it's some of the other medium tanks, you won't be able to pen their turret because they're just the nature of the beast. But this tank does, you know, this was a tier 10 game that I played, and you can see I didn't get up close and personal with a lot of people because there were a lot of tier 10 tanks, and that's kind of suicidal sometimes when you're not top tier. But the T54 is by many considered the gold standard, like I said before. This tank, the reason why is because this tank is that good. And a lot of players abuse the heck out of this tank. And you know, what can I say? I think if you enjoy medium tanks and you don't mind and you can negotiate around the lack of gun depression this thing has, and also a bit of the rate of fire in here, I come and abuse this AMX-30 here. I got hit points to trade with him, and he's the last tank, so I don't mind trading. This tank could be, the Russian tank lines could be the tank for you. So there it is. They capped out. Would have liked to get that final kill, but look at the final numbers here, guys. So it's 33,000 XP. It's a first class game, 4,300 damage, 2,000 assists, 1 kill, not too bad. A walk with 1,600 base XP. So hopefully, guys, you got a little bit of information out of this. And if you're thinking about going down the medium tank line and not trying to decide which one, I do recommend the Soviet medium line. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, keep your powder dry.